Imagine you are sitting across from someone in a room where the light has grown soft and the world outside has finally gone quiet. Perhaps it is at a kitchen table late at night, the only sound being the faint hum of a refrigerator, or in the back corner of a coffee shop, just as the baristas begin to turn over the signs on the door. You have been talking for an hour, maybe two. The conversation has been easy, the kind of polished, rhythmic exchange you have mastered over years of social survival. You are presenting the version of yourself that works, the one that is competent, or perhaps the one that is cynical and funny, or just the version that is perpetually fine. You know this dance. You know exactly which stories to tell to keep the atmosphere light, and exactly where to smile to ensure that no one asks a question that goes too deep. And then, it happens. They say something. It isn't a grand proclamation or a heavy clinical diagnosis. It might be a small, almost accidental observation about the way your voice dropped when you mentioned a childhood home, or a look they give you that lingers just 3 seconds longer than a polite gaze should. It is a look of total, unblinking presence. In that sudden silence, you feel a sharp chill, a prickle of electricity running down your spine. It is the physical sensation of a lock clicking open when you didn't give anyone the key. You realize, with a jolt of genuine terror, that they are no longer talking to the person you are pretending to be. They are looking past the costume. They are looking at the person standing behind it, the one you haven't even looked at yourself in a decade. Your first instinct, the one that screams from the very center of your nervous system, is not to lean into the warmth of being seen. It is to run. It is to find your coat, make a hurried excuse about an early morning or a forgotten chore, and disappear as fast as you can into the safety of the dark. You feel exposed, not in a way that feels romantic or cinematic, but in a way that feels like a violation of a boundary you didn't even know you had built. This is the moment the ego begins to panic. You have spent your entire life constructing a fortress, brick by brick, to ensure that the soft, wounded, and unpredictable parts of your soul remain safely locked in the basement. And here is this person, standing in the foyer of your life, casually asking about the stairs. It is a quiet disorientation that makes the room feel smaller and the air feel thinner. You realize that if you stay in this chair, you might actually have to exist as you truly are, rather than as you have been performing. And for many of us, the idea of being found is far more frightening than the idea of remaining lost. This urge to flee is a strange and heavy thing to carry, especially when it arrives at the exact moment you thought you were searching for connection. It is the ultimate irony of the human heart. You might have spent years telling your friends, your therapist, or simply the cold, indifferent ceiling of your bedroom that all you want is to be understood. You have complained about the shallowness of modern life, the endless swiping, the hollow small talk, and the way people only ever seem to see the surface. You have asked the universe for depth. Yet, when someone finally approaches those depths, when they actually bring a lantern down into the tunnels of your inner world, you find yourself reaching for the oars to row away as fast as you can. Think about how this feels in the days that follow that moment of exposure. It begins with a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in how you perceive them. Suddenly, you start to notice things that didn't bother you an hour ago. You become hyper-fixated on the way they clear their throat, or a minor disagreement in musical taste, or the way they handled a menu. You take these tiny, insignificant pebbles, and you magnify them until they become a mountain, a wall between you and them. You tell yourself, with a sudden and suspicious certainty, that they aren't actually your type. You tell yourself the timing is wrong, or that they are probably too demanding, too intense, or that something about their energy just feels off. This is the architecture of sabotage. It is the mind's way of creating distance when the soul feels the threat of proximity. You might find yourself becoming cold or distant during your next interaction, offering one-word answers to questions that deserve stories. You might stop responding to their messages for a few days, relishing the cold, familiar safety of your own isolation. In that isolation, nobody can see the parts of you that you find unacceptable. When you are alone, you are the master of your image. You can curate your thoughts, edit your history, and maintain the illusion that you are exactly who you want to be. But the moment their name flashes on your phone, that image begins to crack again. You feel a deep, vibrating tension between two parts of yourself that have been at war since you were a child. One part is a lonely, reaching thing, a child standing at a window, desperately hoping someone will stop and stay. The other part is a watchful, jagged-edged guard, convinced that if anyone ever truly sees what is inside you, they will turn away in disgust, or perhaps even worse, they will stay and demand that you change everything about yourself. We often prefer the familiar ache of being alone to the unpredictable danger of being known. Being alone is a controlled pain. We know its borders, we know its depth, and we know exactly how to soothe it. But being seen is an invitation to a transformation we cannot control. It is a surrender of the ego's sovereignty. We sabotage the connection because we would rather be right about our unlovability than be surprised by a love we didn't think we could sustain. You look for their flaws as a way to protect yourself from your own. If you can prove they aren't the right person, then you can justify going back to the fortress. You can return to the version of your life where you don't have to be vulnerable, where you don't have to risk the absolute bone-shaking devastation of being seen and still, somehow, failing to be enough. It is a quiet, desperate circularity. You are running from the very thing you are dying to find, because the finding requires a death of the person you have become just to survive. You walk through your apartment and feel the silence, and you think you want it broken. But when the person arrives who can break it, you realize they aren't just breaking the silence. They are breaking you open. You feel the urge to pick a fight, to create a reason for them to leave, so that you can go back to the morning you understand. It is easier to grieve a loss than it is to sustain a presence that mirrors back your own unhealed wounds. You find yourself waiting for the other shoe to drop, not realizing that you are the one holding the shoe, ready to drop it yourself just to get the ending over with. This is the weight of the runner, the person who craves the light but has lived in the cave for so long that the sun feels like a fire. To understand why this visceral urge to flee is so powerful, we have to look at the architecture of the self you've been building since you were small. Carl Jung spoke often of the persona, a term he borrowed from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. The persona is not a lie, and it isn't inherently evil. It is a functional necessity of being human. It is the face we wear to meet the world, the professional suit we put on for the office, the polite smile we give a stranger at the market, or the version of us that remains pleasant and coherent during a difficult family dinner. We need the mask to navigate a complex society that would be overwhelmed if we all shared our rawest truths at every moment. The problem, however, is that many of us have forgotten that we are wearing it. We have spent so many years polishing the mask, making sure it looks strong, capable, and unbothered, that we have come to identify with it entirely. We tell ourselves, "Shukun, I am the successful one," or "I am the person who never breaks," or "I am the one who doesn't really need anyone." We mistake the role we play for the soul that resides beneath it. But beneath that mask, in the quiet, unlit corners of the psyche, lives everything else. This is what Jung called the shadow, the parts of you that were deemed too loud, too needy, too angry, or too sensitive for your early environment to handle. You learned very early on, perhaps through a parent's subtle frown or a teacher's sharp word, that if you showed those parts, you might lose the love or the safety you needed to survive. So you pushed them down. You built a wall between your public face and your private truth. And for a long time, that wall worked. It kept you safe. It allowed you to move through the world without being hurt too often. Because if people were only ever looking at the mask, then they could never truly touch you. But the wall that keeps people out is the same wall that keeps you in. When you meet someone who has the rare, almost supernatural ability to look past your persona, it feels like a total structural failure of your entire defense system. They aren't looking at the mask you've spent 30 years perfecting. They are looking at the person behind it who is still waiting to be known. This is why it feels like terror rather than romance. To the ego, which is heavily invested in the mask's survival, being seen is not an act of love, it is an act of destruction. If they see the real you, they will inevitably see the parts you have spent your life trying to kill or hide. You feel a profound, heavy sense of shame, a fear that if the light of their attention touches your shadow, you will cease to exist, or worse, you will be found unworthy of the very connection you crave. The urge to run is actually a desperate attempt to save your persona from collapsing. You would rather stay behind the mask and be lonely than take the mask off and be vulnerable. You are protecting a version of yourself that you don't even like, simply because it is the only version you know how to be. You are terrified that without the mask, you are nothing. You fear that if you let the guard down and show the jagged edges of your true self, the other person will see the fraud you believe yourself to be. This is the psychological tension of the right person. They aren't right because they make you feel happy all the time. They are right because they make the mask feel heavy, and they make the lie of your persona impossible to maintain. This encounter creates a friction in the psyche. On one side, there is the drive toward individuation, the soul's desire to be whole and authentic. On the other side, there is the ego's drive for safety and the status quo. The panic you feel is the sound of these two forces colliding. When someone sees you, they are essentially asking you to drop your weapons. But when you've been at war for your own survival for decades, dropping your weapons feels like a death sentence. You begin to project your own fear onto them. You see their kindness as a trap, their curiosity as an intrusion, and their steadiness as a threat to your autonomy. You convince yourself that by running, you are saving yourself. But Jung would argue that you are actually saving your prison. You are running away from the very mirror that could show you the way out of your own isolation. The terror is not of the other person, but of the immense, beautiful, and terrifying reality of who you might be if you finally stopped pretending. To see this dynamic in its rawest form, let us step away from the abstract and look at the life of someone who has mastered the art of being enough. Imagine a person who has spent their entire existence being the pillar, the rock, the one everyone else leans on. Let's call him a man who has built his identity around being unshakable. In his career, he is the fixer. In his family, he is the one who holds the finances and the emotions together. In his social circle, he is the one with the steady hand and the calm advice. He has built a life that is a monument to competence and strength, and he is proud of his self-reliance. He wears his unbothered nature like a suit of armor, and for years, He has convinced himself that this is simply who he is. But one evening, he meets someone who doesn't care about his accomplishments or his stoicism. They are sitting in the quiet of a late dinner, and she doesn't ask him about his job or his plans for the future. Instead, she looks at him, really looks at him, and says, "You look so tired of being strong." In that moment, the world stops. He doesn't feel grateful for the observation. He doesn't feel a warm rush of relief. Instead, he feels a cold, paralyzing dread that starts in his chest and radiates to his fingertips. He feels an immediate, irrational surge of anger toward her. He tells himself she is being intrusive. He tells himself she is projecting or overanalyzing him, trying to find a crack where none exists. He leaves that dinner feeling unsettled, his heart racing in a way that feels like an impending heart attack. What he is experiencing is the sudden, violent intrusion of his own unlived life. Inside this man, buried beneath layers of duty and resilience, is a child who was never allowed to be weak. There is a version of himself that was suppressed 30 years ago so he could survive a childhood where he had to grow up too fast, or perhaps a world that only valued him for what he could provide. That unlived life, the part that is soft, that is exhausted, that just wants to be held without having to earn it, is now screaming for air. And the terror he feels is the terror of his old self dying so this new, more authentic self can be born. And this is the profound weight of the other in Jungian psychology. The person meant for you is often the person who makes it impossible to continue the performance. They don't arrive to validate your mask. They arrive to haunt it. They act as a catalyst for a process you didn't ask for, but that your soul has been starving for. They expose the agonizing gap between the person you show the world and the person you actually are when the lights are out and the room is empty. This process of being seen is rarely pleasant. It involves the messy, painful work of integration, bringing those exiled, shameful parts of yourself out of the shadow and into the light of the relationship. You might find yourself grieving for the person you thought you were. You might feel a sense of nakedness that is almost physical, as if the clothes of your persona have been stripped away, leaving you shivering in the cold. You are losing the safety of your labels. You are losing the certainty of your isolation. This person is demanding that you show up not as a role, not as a provider or a success story, but as a human being, with all the jagged edges, the unresolved wounds, and the deep-seated fears that humans carry. They are inviting you into what Jungian analysts call the crucible of a real relationship. In alchemy, a crucible is a vessel that can withstand extreme heat, used to melt down base metals so they can be purified into something higher. The relationship is that vessel. The heat is the intensity of being truly seen. This heat burns away everything that is false, everything that is performative, and everything that is mask. The reason you want to run, the reason this man in our story wants to stop calling her, is that he isn't sure he will survive the fire. He is afraid that once the strong man is melted away, there will be absolutely nothing left. He is afraid he is just a hollow shell held together by the mask. But the truth is the exact opposite. The mask is the only thing standing in the way of his own wholeness. The right person isn't someone who makes you feel comfortable in your lies. They are the person who makes those lies feel unbearable. They make the weight of the armor so heavy that you eventually have to choose between keeping the armor or keeping your life. Think about the energy it takes to maintain a lie. Think about the constant, low-level anxiety of being found out. When you run from someone who sees you, you are running back to that anxiety. You are choosing the exhaustion of the performance over the terrifying freedom of the truth. But as long as you are performing, you can never be loved. Because if someone loves the mask, you will always know, deep down, that they don't actually love you. You will remain a stranger in your own life. The only way to be loved is to be seen, and the only way to be seen is to stay in the room when the urge to run is at its strongest. You have to let the strong man or the fine person die, so that the human being can finally take a breath. The shift, the moment of true alchemy, happens when you realize that the fear you feel is not a sign to leave, but a signal that you are standing at the very edge of your own growth. In the quiet, symbolic language of the soul, terror is often a mask for a profound opportunity. We have been taught by a superficial culture that love should be easy, that it should be a harbor of constant comfort and good vibes. But Jungian psychology suggests something much more rigorous and much more beautiful. That a real connection is a battlefield where the ego goes to die so the self can be born. If you can find the courage to stay, not to fix yourself, not to perform better, not to win the argument, but simply to remain in the physical and emotional room while being seen, something remarkable begins to occur. The internal tension starts to change its frequency. You begin to realize that the person sitting across from you isn't looking for the perfect version of you that you've worked so hard to curate. They aren't interested in the statue you've carved of yourself. They are looking for the human pulse beneath the stone. When you stop running, you are making a choice that goes far beyond romance. You are choosing yourself. You are deciding, perhaps for the first time in your life, that you are worth being known in your mess, in your exhaustion, and in your fear. You are deciding that your shadow is not a monster to be exiled, but a part of your own humanity that deserves a seat at the table. This is what Jung meant by individuation. It is the slow, often painful, but ultimately holy journey of becoming the person you were always meant to be, rather than the person you were told you had to be to stay safe. A significant connection is the most powerful tool we have for this journey. It provides a sacred space, a protected temenos, where the self can finally emerge from the wreckage of the persona. When you stay, you allow the other person to act as a witness to your becoming. You allow them to hold the mirror while you do the hard work of looking into it. This doesn't mean the relationship becomes a fairy tale. In fact, it will likely be one of the hardest things you ever do. It will require you to be honest with yourself every single day. It will require you to catch yourself when you start to sabotage, to name your fear when you want to lash out, and to stay soft when every instinct tells you to harden. But there is a quiet, steady peace that comes with finally being found. It is not the loud, frantic high of infatuation. It is something much deeper. It is the peace of no longer having to carry the weight of a mask that never fit you anyway. It is the relief of a soldier finally returning home from a war they forgot they were even fighting. It is the realization that you don't have to be enough, because you already are. So if you are listening to this and you feel that familiar urge to run, if you feel that sudden coldness, that urge to pick a fight, or the need to sabotage a connection that feels too real, I invite you to just sit with it for a moment. Don't act on the impulse. Don't pack your bags or send that "we need to talk" text just yet. Just notice the fear. Acknowledge the fortress you built to keep yourself safe when you were young and unprotected. Give that fortress credit for the work it did to get you this far. And then, slowly, look at the person who is standing there, waiting for you to come out. They aren't the enemy. They aren't a predator trying to tear you down. They are a mirror, showing you a version of yourself that is far more beautiful, far more complex, and far more capable of love than the one you've been pretending to be. Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to see who is actually standing behind the mask. You might find that the person you've been hiding from all these years is the very person you've been waiting your whole life to meet. You aren't losing yourself in this connection. You are finally finding the you that was there all along, waiting for someone to be brave enough to look. Thank you for sitting in this space with me tonight. This journey into the deep is not one we were meant to take alone. If this spoke to a quiet, hidden corner of your life, I invite you to share a reflection in the comments, perhaps a moment where you felt that urge to flee, and what happened when you chose, against all your instincts, to stay. We are all learning how to be seen, one slow, courageous breath at a time. Be well, and stay close to your own depth.